Welcome to Tales from Sector 9, your portal to immersive sci-fi audio stories. If you enjoy deep space action, rogue AI, and conspiracy theory, you're in the right place. Tap like and subscribe to keep the adventures coming. Drop a comment and tell us where in the galaxy you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and prepare for tonight's story, Ashes of the Padawan. The galaxy was a scream choked in dust and darkness. Rel Venal, 15 years of age by the reckoning of a republic that was now a ghost, awoke to this suffocating truth. He was entombed. Ferrocrete, twisted plasteel, and the pulverized remnants of what was once the Jedi enclave on Dagen Vale pressed down on him. A monstrous cairn built by an unseen, malevolent hand. The air was thick with the acrid tang of ozone, burnt circuits, and something else. A coppery, organic scent that his mind, still reeling, refused to identify. Dagen Vale. Even before this, it had been a world teetering on the edge of oblivion. A storm-torn jewel in the forgotten folds of the outer rim, its surface was a canvas of perpetual twilight, lashed by ion-charged gales that sculpted its rust-red mesas into screaming gargoyles. The very dust of the planet was abrasive, carrying a faint electrical charge that frayed tempers and wore down machinery with equal, relentless patience. It was a place of harsh beauty and harsher truths, a fitting crucible, Master On had once said, for the forging of a Jedi's spirit. Master Kivar On. The name was a shard of ice in Rel's heart. The memory, when it finally clawed its way through the concussion-induced fog, was a fresh wave of agony. The claxons, the shuddering of the earth, the roar of descending ordnance. Then his master, a silhouette of serene defiance against a backdrop of fire and collapsing duracrete, hurling him into the relative safety of a small meditation alcove. The last thing Rel saw was the green flash of Master On's blade meeting a storm of crimson, and then the universe caving in, the Master's body a final, desperate shield. Order 66. The words, whispered across clandestine channels just days before, had been an abstract horror. Now, they were the ferrocrete pressing against his chest, the silence in the Force, the taste of blood and grit in his mouth. His limbs, when he finally managed to coax them into movement, were a symphony of pain. A dull throb in his skull, a searing fire in his left shoulder, where a jagged piece of debris had pinned him. He tried to call out, his voice a dry rasp, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive weight of the rubble. His comlink, a battered wrist unit, was a mangled ruin of wires and cracked casing. Useless. His training, barely past the rudimentary forms and the philosophical underpinnings of the Jedi Code, felt like a child's toy in the face of this desolation. Incomplete. And the Force. The Force was silent. Not merely quiet, as it sometimes was during moments of intense concentration or fatigue, but a profound, echoing void. It was as if a vibrant symphony he had listened to his entire life had abruptly ceased, leaving behind a ringing, terrifying deafness. Where once there had been a gentle current, a guiding whisper, a sense of interconnectedness that was as natural as breathing, now there was nothing, or worse than nothing, a distorted stillness, like the surface of a poisoned well, reflecting only his own fear and despair. This spiritual disorientation was a deeper wound than any physical injury. It was the severing of a lifeline, the extinguishing of an inner sun. He was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone, trapped, wounded, spiritually adrift in a galaxy that had, in the span of mere moments, declared him and everything he was meant to be. Anathema, the lineage of the Jedi, stretching back millennia, felt not like a source of strength, but a crushing burden, a death sentence signed by the galaxy itself. Days, or perhaps cycles, time had lost its meaning in the choking darkness, bled into one another. Rel survived on the meager emergency rations tucked into his utility belt, and the condensation he painstakingly collected from the cooler surfaces of the rubble. His thirst was a constant torment, his hunger a dull ache that gnawed at his resolve. But it was the silence of the Force that ate at his sanity. He would reach out, as Master On had taught him, seeking the familiar currents, the subtle energies that bound all living things. Each attempt was like grasping at smoke, leaving him emptier, more afraid. Was this what it meant to be cut off? Was the Force itself dead? Or had he, in his terror and grief, somehow broken his own connection? The air grew staler, the confinement more unbearable. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of his control. He fought it back, remembering Master On's lessons on mindfulness, on centering oneself even in the heart of chaos. The storm outside is but a reflection of the storm within, Padawan. Still the inner tempest, and the outer will lose its power over you. Easy words to say in the tranquil halls of the enclave, harder to practice when buried alive. One cycle, as he was testing a loose slab of ferrocrete above him, it shifted. A sliver of Dagen Vale's bruised twilight, filtered through layers of dust, pierced the gloom. Hope, fragile but fierce, flared in his chest. With renewed, desperate strength, Rel pushed. The slab groaned, resisted, then with a grating screech gave way. Dust and smaller debris rained down, but above it, a narrow opening. Freedom, or at least a larger tomb. He clawed his way upwards, his injured shoulder screaming in protest, his muscles burning. Finally, gasping, bleeding, and coated in a thick layer of grime, he pulled himself free. He stood, or rather swayed, on a precipice of jagged ruin, overlooking a scene of utter devastation. The enclave, once a proud, if modest, testament to Jedi resilience on this harsh world, was a mangled skeleton. Towers were snapped like dry twigs. Courtyards were choked with mountains of rubble, and the air itself hummed with a residual, malevolent energy. The perpetual storms of Dagen Vale seemed to have momentarily paused, as if the planet itself was holding its breath, surveying the carnage. A cold, ion-laced wind whipped around him, carrying the scent of rain and the distant, mournful howl of some native creature. The silence of the Force remained, a gaping wound in the fabric of his reality. He was an ember, still faintly glowing, in a universe of ash and dust. The sliver of Dagen Vale's bruised twilight that had been his salvation now illuminated a landscape of profound loss. Rel Venal, Padawan no more by any meaningful measure, stumbled through the skeletal remains of the Dagen Vale enclave. Each step was a negotiation with pain, his body a chorus of protests against the abuse it had suffered. His search was not for survivors. A chilling certainty, colder than the ion-laced wind, told him there were none. He searched for something else, a focal point for the maelstrom of grief and disorientation that threatened to consume him. It was near the heart of what had once been the central training hall, beneath a precariously balanced arch of shattered ferrocrete, that he found it. The hilt of his master's lightsaber, or what remained of it. The gleaming alloy was scorched and dented, the activation stud missing, the emitter shroud cracked like a broken tooth. But the kyber crystal housing, though battered, seemed intact. Rel knelt, his fingers tracing the familiar contours, the worn grip that had molded itself to Kivar On's hand over decades of patient practice. The hilt was cold, inert, a dead thing. Yet, as he clutched it, a faint echo, a whisper of memory, brushed against his consciousness. The blade is only as strong as the hand behind it, Rel, and the heart behind that hand. Remember this. The Force flows through the crystal, yes, but it is the Jedi spirit that gives it form, purpose. Without a clear heart, a steady hand, even the brightest blade is but a dangerous spark. Master On's voice, calm and resonant, not from the silent Force, but from the deeper well of memory. It was a lesson given during a particularly frustrating sparring session, when Rel's own blade, a simple training saber, had felt unwieldy and alien in his grasp. His master had disarmed him with an almost casual flick of the wrist, then deactivated his own emerald blade. He'd held the hilt out to Rel. This is not merely a tool, Padawan. It is an extension of yourself. To understand the saber, you must first understand the heart that guides it. Now, holding the broken remnants of that same hilt, the words resonated with a terrible new clarity. Master On was gone. The Jedi Order, as far as Rel knew, was a scattered handful of embers, if not extinguished entirely. His own training was a fractured mosaic of half-learned techniques and philosophical tenets that seemed to mock him in their inadequacy. The Force itself was a silent, unanswering void. What strength could his hand possibly possess? What clarity could his shattered heart offer? Yet, the broken hilt was a tangible link, a responsibility, a flicker of defiance in the overwhelming darkness. He would rebuild it, not just the weapon, but himself. The thought, audacious and perhaps foolish, settled in his mind with a surprising firmness. He had no access to the specialized tools of a Jedi temple, no pristine focusing crystals, no guidance save the fading echoes of his master's teachings. But Dagen Vale, in its desolation, was a graveyard of technology, a scavenger's bitter paradise. The enclave itself, and the storm-lashed ruins of the old colonial settlements that dotted the planet's surface, might yield the components he needed. His immediate needs were more pressing: water, uncontaminated food, shelter from the increasingly volatile weather. Dagen Vale's brief respite was ending. The sky was darkening to a bruised purple, and the wind carried the telltale scent of an approaching ion storm, the kind that could strip flesh from bone and scour metal to a mirror sheen. He found a relatively intact storeroom beneath a collapsed dormitory wing. The Duracrete had held, preserving a cache of emergency supplies: ration packs, water purification tablets, med packs, and a few thermal cloaks. It was a small hoard, but enough to sustain him for a time. As the first corrosive raindrops of the ion storm began to hiss against the rubble outside, Rel worked by the dim light of a glow rod, examining the broken saber. He needed an energy cell, a new activation matrix, focusing lens components, perhaps even a replacement emitter shroud if the original proved too damaged. The storm raged for 3 cycles, a symphony of shrieking wind and crackling energy that turned the ruins into a phantasmagorical landscape. When it finally abated, leaving the air tasting of ozone and wet rust, Rel ventured out. The landscape was subtly altered, new pathways carved by the storm, old ones buried. It was during one of these scavenging expeditions, picking through the wreckage of a downed atmospheric skiff, that he first encountered them. They moved with the practiced silence of creatures accustomed to Dagen Vale's treachery. One was a hulking figure, a limping silhouette against the ochre sky. Bryke, as Rel would later learn. His face was a roadmap of old scars, one leg dragging slightly, a relic of some forgotten conflict. He carried a heavy, custom-modified blaster rifle that looked as weathered and dangerous as he did. The other was a girl, Nessa, barely older than Rel himself, her eyes wide and haunted, but with a core of hardened resilience. She clutched a rusty vibro knife as if it were an extension of her own arm, her movements quick and wary. She was thin, her clothes patched and worn, but she moved with a desperate energy. Rel froze, his hand instinctively going to the broken saber hilt tucked into his belt. He was no match for them, not in his current state. Brake's voice, when it came, was a low rumble, like stones grinding together. "Well now, what have we here? A fresh rat for the scrap heap or something more?" His one good eye narrowed, assessing Rel with a disconcerting intensity. Nessa said nothing, her gaze flicking from Rel to the surrounding rubble, constantly evaluating threats. "Just looking for supplies," Rel managed, his voice hoarse. "Supplies are scarce," Brake stated, his blaster never wavering. "What have you got to trade, boy?" Rel hesitated. He had little of value, save for the Jedi artifacts he carried, and revealing those was unthinkable. He offered a handful of ration packs and a water purification unit. An uneasy truce was struck. They traded some of his rations for a battered hydro spanner and a small power coil Brake had salvaged. The ex-mercenary, despite his gruff exterior, seemed to possess a shrewd eye for value, not just in objects, but in people. He watched Rel with an unnerving focus, as if weighing his potential. Nessa, on the other hand, kept her distance. Her eyes, Rel noticed, kept flicking to the strange, cylindrical object at his belt. She didn't see a broken tool. She sensed something else, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. "He's not normal," she'd whispered to Brake later, when she thought Rel couldn't hear, her voice tight with a primal distrust that transcended mere suspicion. She was right, of course, though not in the way she imagined. He was a dying ember, and the universe was a storm. The uneasy alliance with the scavengers, Bryke and Nessa, settled into a tense routine. Days were spent picking through the corpse of the enclave and the wider, storm-scoured ruins of Dagen Vale's forgotten colonial past. Nights were huddled in makeshift shelters, the silence punctuated by the howl of the perpetual gales and the unspoken anxieties that hung heavy in the thin air. Rel focused on his primary task, rebuilding his master's lightsaber. The power coil Brake had traded him was a start, but it was crude, designed for industrial tools, not the precise, energy-hungry heart of a Jedi's weapon. He needed more. He found a focusing crystal, surprisingly intact, within the shattered remnants of a Jedi training remote. It was small, imperfect, but it pulsed with a faint residual resonance when he held it, a tiny whisper in the overwhelming silence of the Force. He salvaged emitter components from a derelict survey droid, its optical array surprisingly robust. The activation stud was the greatest challenge. He eventually fashioned a crude but functional replacement from the trigger mechanism of a discarded holdout blaster. Each piece was a compromise, a testament to his desperation and dwindling resources. It was during one such scavenging run, several clicks from their current camp, near the edge of a vast, wind-eroded canyon, that the sky itself seemed to acquire a malevolent eye. a glint of durasteel, high above, catching the sickly light of Dagen Vale's twin suns as they dipped below the jagged horizon. A patrol. Clones. Even from this distance, their armor, though scuffed and bearing unfamiliar unit markings, was unmistakable. Remnants. Vultures picking over the carcass of the Jedi Order. Commander Loren, a man whose face had become a mask of grim duty, surveyed the desolate landscape through his macro binoculars. His orders were clear. Locate and eliminate any surviving Jedi on Dagen Vale. The Enclave's destruction had been thorough, but whispers persisted. Jedi were like desert weeds, resilient, capable of taking root in the most inhospitable soil. His surveillance droid, a sleek, arachnid-like machine designated X7, hummed softly beside him, its multiple optical sensors sweeping the terrain. Rel's blood ran cold. He, Brake, and Nessa had been tracking a faint energy signature, hoping for a functional power cell, when the patrol appeared. Brake, with a grunt, shoved Nessa towards a cluster of jagged, rust-colored rock formations. "Get down, and stay down." Rel needed no such prompting. He scrambled for cover, pressing himself against the cold stone, his heart hammering against his ribs. He tried to use the Force, to cloak his presence as Master On had begun to teach him, but the silence within him was a suffocating blanket. He could only rely on the natural camouflage of his drab clothing and the broken, uneven terrain. His fear, however, was a palpable thing, a raw, untamed energy coiling in his gut. He could feel it, a prickling heat, a desperate tremor. X7's sensors, designed to pick up the faintest energy fluctuations, registered the anomaly. Not a weapon discharge, not a standard energy signature, but something else. A flare of concentrated bioelectric energy, localized, intense, and distinctly unusual. The droid's internal processors cross-referenced the signature with its database of known Force abilities. Probability, Jedi presence, untrained, uncontrolled. It transmitted its findings to Commander Loran. "Target acquired," Loran muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. "Sector Gamma 7. Possible Force sensitive. Deploy ground units." Rel didn't hear the command, but he felt the shift in the atmosphere, the subtle change in the patrol's posture. They knew. Somehow they knew. Panic, sharp and cold, threatened to overwhelm him. He had to move, to create a diversion. Anything. His gaze fell on a loose pile of shale and scree perched precariously on the canyon edge above the clone patrol's advance path. An idea, desperate and reckless, formed in his mind. He closed his eyes, not reaching for the absent Force, but for the raw, churning fear within him. He focused it, channeled it, not with the calm precision of a Jedi, but with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. He visualized the shale, the instability, the downward path. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint tremor. A single pebble dislodged, then another. The fear within him surged, a wild, uncontrolled torrent, and the shale moved. Not a gentle slide, but a sudden, violent cascade, a miniature avalanche of rock and dust that roared down the canyon slope. It wasn't enough to stop the clones, but it was enough to startle them, to break their advance for a precious few moments. Enough time for Brake to lay down suppressing fire, for Nessa to create a smoke screen with a salvaged emergency flare, for Rel to melt back into the shadows of the deeper ravine. They had escaped, but the encounter left Rel shaken. That flare of power. It had been his, yet not his. Raw, untamed, born of fear, frightening. Back in the relative safety of their hidden camp, a hollowed-out cavern beneath a massive, wind-sculpted rock formation, Rel worked with feverish intensity on the lightsaber. The encounter with the clones had stripped away his last vestiges of hesitation. He needed a weapon, not for attack, not for revenge, but for survival. He assembled the scavenged components, his hands surprisingly steady, despite the tremor that still lingered in his limbs. The industrial power coil hummed erratically when connected to the activation matrix. The focusing crystal, when seated in its makeshift housing, seemed to resist, to fight against the crude technology surrounding it. He ignored the warning signs, driven by a desperate urgency. Finally, it was done. The hilt was a Frankensteinian assembly of mismatched parts, held together with fused wiring and hope. It felt wrong in his hand, unbalanced, a crude imitation of his master's elegant weapon. He took a deep breath, and with a surge of trepidation, thumbed the activation stud. The lightsaber ignited with a jarring, discordant shriek, a sound utterly alien to the smooth, resonant hum he remembered. The blade was a sickly, flickering yellow-green, spitting sparks and fluctuating in length, its energy field visibly unstable. It was a weapon forged in silence and desperation, a perfect metaphor for his own inner turbulence. He tried a simple training maneuver, a basic parry. The unstable blade bucked in his grip, its energy arcing wildly. He felt a searing pain in his forearm as the blade's corona brushed against his sleeve, instantly vaporizing the fabric and scorching his skin. He cried out, dropping the weapon as if it were a venomous serpent. It clattered to the cavern floor, the erratic blade carving a smoking gouge in the stone before sputtering out with a final mournful hiss. He stared at the crude weapon, then at his burned arm, a fresh wave of despair washing over him. He could build it, but could he wield it? And at what cost? The burn on Rel's forearm was a constant throbbing reminder of his inadequacy. The crude lightsaber lay inert in his pack, a source of both desperate hope and profound fear. Days turned into weeks. The trio, Rel, Brake, and Nessa, continued their precarious existence, their scavenging radius expanding out of necessity. The ruins of the Jedi Enclave had yielded all they were likely to give. They needed more, and more lay beyond the familiar desolation in the wider, unknown wastes of Dagen Vale. It was Brake who suggested venturing towards Vel Kira, the only significant settlement on Dagen Vale. A sprawling, low-slung city nestled in the relative shelter of a massive crater basin. Used to be a decent stopover, the ex-mercenary grumbled, massaging his bad leg. Might be pickings there the storm rats and the imps haven't chewed over yet. Rel was hesitant. A city meant people, and people meant clones, Imperials. But their supplies were dwindling, and the gnawing emptiness of the Force was eroding his spirit. Perhaps, he thought, some contact with a larger community, however fraught with danger, might offer something. A spark, a whisper. The journey to Vel Kira was an ordeal. Dagen Vale's storms were relentless, its terrain treacherous. They traveled under the cover of the planet's perpetual twilight, navigating by the faint glow of its twin moons and Brake's surprisingly accurate, if archaic, navigational tools. Nessa, agile and possessing an almost preternatural ability to sense danger, scouted ahead. Rel, his senses dulled by the Force's silence, felt like a burden. His guilt over Master On's sacrifice, his grief, his fear, they were a constant leaden weight. As they neared Vel Kira, the signs of Imperial occupation became undeniable. Wreckage of civilian speeders, hastily constructed checkpoints manned by grim-faced clone troopers, and the ubiquitous presence of surveillance droids, their single red eyes glowing malevolently in the gloom. The city itself, when they finally crested the crater rim and looked down upon it, was a grim tableau. What might once have been a vibrant, if rugged, frontier town was now shrouded in an atmosphere of fear and oppression. Imperial banners, stark and black, hung limply from public buildings. The streets were patrolled, curfews enforced. They learned, through hushed whispers from other scavengers and fringe dwellers they encountered on the outskirts, of Moff Kirin volume. An imperial governor dispatched to Dagen Vale to restore order after the Jedi purge. Val ruled Velkira with an iron fist encased in a velvet glove of chillingly efficient bureaucracy. Surveillance was his watchword, fear his currency. Every citizen was a potential dissident, every shadow a hiding place for rebellion. The clones were his enforcers, their loyalty absolute, their methods brutal. Rel's guilt and grief intensified. This was the galaxy his master had died to protect, a galaxy where fear was the only law and hope a forgotten word. He tried to meditate as Master On had taught him, to find some solace, some clarity in the Force. But the silence persisted, and instead of peace, his meditations were haunted by visions of his master's death. He saw the flash of crimson blades, felt the crushing weight of the collapsing temple, heard Master On's final, choked cry. He would awaken from these visions trembling, his heart pounding, the taste of ash in his mouth. It was Nessa who finally broke through his despair, though not in the way he expected. Her younger brother, Kale, had fallen ill. A fever, a racking cough, common ailments on Dagen Vale, but deadly without proper medical attention. The only place to get medicine was within Velkira, in the Imperial Quarantine Zone, a place from which few returned unchanged, if they returned at all. "Please, Rel," Nessa begged. Her usual hardened exterior cracked, revealing the desperate fear beneath. "They say you Jedi. You have powers. You can help him." Rel recoiled as if struck. "I am not a Jedi," he said, the words tasting like poison on his tongue. "Not anymore. The Force is silent to me. I have no powers." He saw the hope die in Nessa's eyes, replaced by a weary resignation that cut him deeper than any physical blow. Brake, ever the pragmatist, offered a different solution. "There's a smuggler contact I know in the lower sectors. Might be able to get some meds for a price." The price, Rel knew, would be steep. All they had scavenged, perhaps more. The exchange was to happen near a derelict atmospheric processing plant on the edge of the quarantine zone. It was a trap. Clone troopers, alerted by an informant, swarmed the meeting point. Brake, seeing Nessa and the ailing Kyle, whom Nessa had insisted on bringing, wrapped in thermal blankets, about to be captured, did the unthinkable. He roared a challenge, his heavy blaster spitting defiance, drawing the clones' attention. "Run, you fools! Get the boy out!" He bought them precious seconds, his limping form a surprisingly formidable obstacle, before a concentrated volley of blaster fire cut him down. Nessa screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure anguish. She tried to go back, but Rel grabbed her, pulling her and the feverish Kale towards the relative cover of the ruined plant. Clones were closing in. There was no escape. Something inside Rel snapped. The fear, the grief, the guilt, the crushing weight of the Force's silence, it all coalesced into a single white-hot point of rage. He fumbled for the crude lightsaber in his pack, his hand closing around the makeshift hilt. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He acted. He thumbed the activation stud. The unstable blade shrieked to life, its sickly yellow-green light casting grotesque shadows on the rusted machinery. He charged the nearest checkpoint, a whirlwind of desperate, untrained fury. His movements were clumsy, raw, lacking any of the elegance or precision of a Jedi. He swung the erratic blade not with skill, but with a brutal, terrifying force. Blaster bolts sizzled past him, some deflected by sheer dumb luck as the unstable energy field of his saber flared erratically. He was a force of nature, a storm of grief unleashed. He didn't fight like a Jedi. He fought like a cornered animal, teeth bared, driven by a primal need to protect. He saw a clone trooper raise a blaster, and with a guttural roar, he brought the crackling blade down. There was a sickening sizzle, the smell of ozone and something else, something that made his stomach churn. The clones, momentarily stunned by the sheer ferocity of the attack, by the appearance of a forbidden weapon, faltered. It was enough. Rel, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the adrenaline coursing through him, leaving him shaking and nauseous, grabbed Nessa and Kyle. They plunged into the labyrinthine depths of the ruined plant, the sounds of blaster fire and confused shouts fading behind them. Later, hidden in a forgotten maintenance tunnel, the adrenaline wore off, leaving Rel trembling and horrified. He looked at the lightsaber, now deactivated, its hilt still warm in his hand. He had fought. He had killed. The realization was a cold stone in his stomach. He could fight, yes, but the raw, brutal power he had unleashed, the fear he had seen in the clone's eyes, the sickening finality of his blows, it frightened him more than any Imperial threat. He could fight, but at what cost to his soul? The silence of the Force suddenly felt less like an absence and more like a judgment. The aftermath of the skirmish at the quarantine zone checkpoint left a bitter taste in Rel's mouth. Bryke was gone, a casualty of a fight that wasn't his. Kyle, Nessa's brother, was still desperately ill. The medicine they'd risked so much for now, an impossible dream. And Rel was a killer. The crude lightsaber, once a symbol of desperate hope, now felt like a brand, searing his conscience with the memory of his brutal, uncontrolled rage. He'd hidden it deep within his pack, unable to bear the sight of it. Nessa, though grieving for Bryke, was pragmatic. Kyle needed help, and their current hiding place in the derelict atmospheric plant wouldn't remain safe for long. Imperial patrols would be scouring the area. The old temple ruins, she said, her voice flat, devoid of its usual spark. Bryke always said there were deeper levels, places the imps wouldn't bother to search. Maybe there's something there. Old Jedi med supplies, anything. It was a slim hope, but it was all they had. They journeyed back to the shattered enclave, a grim pilgrimage. The ruins seemed even more desolate now, haunted by fresh ghosts. Rel, guided by a half-forgotten memory of Master On mentioning hidden archives, led them to a section of the temple that had partially collapsed into the subterranean caverns that riddled Dagen Vale. After hours of shifting rubble, his injured shoulder protesting with every movement, they found it. A narrow, almost invisible fissure leading down into the darkness. The air within was cool and still, a stark contrast to the storm-lashed surface. By the faint light of a glow rod, they navigated a series of crumbling passageways, their footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. It was in a small circular chamber, its walls lined with empty niches, that Rel found it. Not a cache of medpacks, but a single, unassuming object tucked away in a hidden alcove, shielded from the initial bombing by a thick slab of fallen durasteel. A Jedi holocron. It was Master On's. Rel recognized the intricate carvings on its crystalline surface, the unique energy signature that even the silent force couldn't entirely mask. His hands trembled as he picked it up. It felt cool to the touch, yet pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. With a deep breath, he focused his will, a technique Master On had taught him for accessing such devices. The holocron hummed to life, casting a soft blue glow that illuminated the small chamber. And then, his master's image flickered into existence, not the vibrant, living man Rel remembered, but a translucent, ethereal echo. "Rel, my Padawan," the image of Kavar On began, his voice tinged with a sorrow that transcended time and space. "If you are seeing this, then the worst has come to pass. The order is shattered, and darkness has fallen upon the galaxy." The message was brief, recorded in the final desperate moments before the attack. Master On spoke of the betrayal, of the sudden brutal efficiency of Order 66. He spoke of his fears for the future, for the countless younglings and Padawans scattered and hunted. But then, his tone shifted, a familiar calm settling over his spectral features. "Do not let despair consume you, Rel. The Force is not a weapon to be wielded in anger, nor a shield to hide behind in fear. It is the current that connects all life, the breath of the galaxy itself. Power, my Padawan, is a seductive illusion. The Sith seek to dominate through strength, to control through fear. But the true strength of a Jedi, the strength that endures, lies not in power, but in mercy, in compassion, in the courage to choose light when surrounded by darkness." The image flickered, the blue light dimming. "The Jedi Order may fall, Rel, but the ideals of the Jedi, justice, compassion, service, these must not be allowed to die. They must be reinterpreted, renewed, not in grand temples, but in the hearts of those who dare to hope. Rebuild your saber, young one, but more importantly, rebuild your spirit. Find your own path. The Force will guide you, even if its voice is now a whisper. Remember, Rel, mercy." The image faded, leaving Rel in the dim glow of the holocron, tears streaming down his face. Mercy. In the face of such overwhelming brutality, such profound loss, the concept seemed almost laughably naive. Yet, coming from Master On, from the very heart of the Jedi tradition he had thought lost, the word resonated with an unexpected power. He looked at his hands, the hands that had wielded the crude lightsaber in such a savage fury. He thought of the fear in the clone trooper's eyes before the fatal blow. He thought of Brike's sacrifice, of Kael's innocent suffering. Master On's final lesson was not a condemnation, but a challenge, a path forward. He spent the next few days in the hidden chamber, Nessa tending to Kael in a nearby alcove. Using the few tools he had, and the residual energy of the holocron to guide his focus, Rel began to rebuild his lightsaber, properly this time. He carefully disassembled the crude weapon, cleaning each component, meditating on its purpose, on its connection to the Force, even in its silence. He realigned the focusing crystal, not forcing it, but gently coaxing it into harmony with the other components. He rewired the activation matrix, his touch now precise, his intent clear. He even managed to repair the cracked emitter shroud, using a tiny fusion welder he'd salvaged, the heat surprisingly manageable under his newfound concentration. As he worked, he meditated, not on the horrifying visions of his master's death, but on his master's words: mercy, compassion. He didn't try to reach out to the silent force. Instead, he listened to the silence within himself, acknowledging his fear, his grief, his anger, but no longer consumed by them. He was beginning to understand. The force wasn't a tap to be turned on or off. It was the water itself, the riverbed, the ocean. Even in its silence, it was present. When the lightsaber was finally complete, it felt different in his hand, balanced, whole. He thumbed the activation stud. This time, there was no shriek, no erratic sputtering. A smooth, pure emerald green blade sprang to life, its hum a steady, reassuring thrum. It was his master's color. It was his saber. It was Nessa who brought the news, her voice urgent. "Rel, patrols are sweeping the ruins, more than usual, and I overheard Moff volume. He's planning to level what's left of the temple. Says it's a blight, a potential martyr site. He's bringing in heavy demolition charges." Rel looked at the newly rebuilt lightsaber in his hand. He thought of the scavengers, the fringe dwellers who eked out a meager existence in the ruins, who would be caught in the destruction. He thought of Master On's final resting place, about to be obliterated. He faced a choice, the first true choice of his new path. Warn the scavengers and flee, as any sensible survivor would do, or stay, act. He remembered his master's words. The courage to choose light when surrounded by darkness. He looked at Nessa, at the sleeping Kyle, whose fever, Rel noticed with a faint stirring of something that might have been the Force, seemed to have lessened slightly. Moff Vol wants to erase the past, Rel said, his voice surprisingly steady. But some things deserve to be remembered. Some things are worth fighting for. He clipped the lightsaber to his belt. He would act, not out of revenge for his master, not out of anger, but out of a conviction that was slowly, painfully, taking root in the ashes of his old life. The fire below was stirring. Spacetime's architect. John Duncan's fingers traced the delicate equations sprawled across his office whiteboard at MIT, each variable and constant flowing into the next like tributaries joining a mighty river. The soft hum of quantum processors filled the evening air as simulations ran endlessly in the background, testing and retesting his calculations. He paused, pressing his forehead against the cool surface of the board. Behind him, Boston's skyline glittered through the window, its buildings crowned with the telltale blue glow of zero-point energy reactors, a sight that would have seemed impossible just a decade ago in 2084. "You're doing it again, Johnny," a familiar voice called from the doorway. "Getting lost in those numbers like your old man used to." John turned to find Mira Blackwood leaning against the doorframe, her NASA credentials reflecting the harsh fluorescent light. Her expression carried the same mixture of concern and amusement it always did when she caught him working late. "The simulation's almost done," he said, gesturing to the holographic display that filled half his office. "I think I've finally found it, Mira. The bridge between quantum mechanics and general relativity. It's beautiful." Mira crossed the room, her eyes scanning the equations. Despite her expertise in aerospace engineering, even she struggled to follow the complexity of John's work. "Your grandfather would say you're thinking too much with your head and not enough with your heart." The mention of his grandfather sent John's mind drifting back to those summer months spent in the wilderness. He could almost smell the pine needles, feel the rough bark beneath his fingers as Chaska taught him to track, to survive, to become one with the land. The old man's words echoed in his memory. The universe speaks to us in many languages, grandson. Numbers are just one of them. John's hand unconsciously moved to the medicine pouch he wore beneath his shirt, a gift from Chaska on his 18th birthday. Inside was a single eagle feather and a small piece of red pipestone from the quarries sacred to the Sioux. Even here, in the heart of MIT's advanced physics complex, he kept that connection to his heritage. The quantum processor chimed, pulling him back to the present. The simulation was complete. "My God," Mira whispered, staring at the results floating before them. "John, is this?" He nodded, his heart racing. "The unification theory. But it's more than that, Mira. These equations don't just describe space-time. They show us how to manipulate it." The holographic display showed a three-dimensional representation of his calculations, a perfect marriage of quantum fields and gravitational forces. What had started as a simple attempt to reconcile Einstein's work with quantum mechanics had evolved into something far more profound. "The Duncan equation," Mira said softly, testing the words. "They'll remember this moment, you know. The day physics changed forever." John barely heard her. His mind was already racing ahead, seeing the implications unfold like a cosmic flower blooming. With this equation, humanity could harness vacuum energy, stabilize negative mass fields, and potentially achieve faster-than-light travel. It was the key to the stars themselves. But something else nagged at him, a warning that seemed to come from deep in his bones. His grandfather had taught him that every gift from the universe came with responsibility, with the need for wisdom in its use. The equations before him held power beyond imagining, power that could reshape reality itself. The office door hissed open again, and Dr. Malcolm Duncan strode in, his silver hair disheveled and his eyes bright with excitement. "The monitoring system flagged your results," he said, barely containing his enthusiasm. "Show me." As John began explaining his breakthrough to his father, he couldn't shake the feeling that he stood at a crossroads. In bridging the gap between quantum mechanics and general relativity, he had also bridged the two worlds that defined him, the rational, scientific realm of his father and the spiritual, intuitive wisdom of his grandfather. The sun set over Boston, casting long shadows through the office windows. In the gathering darkness, the equations glowed like ancient runes, holding secrets that would change the course of human history. John Duncan, the man who walked between worlds, had unlocked the fundamental language of the universe itself. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, he heard his grandfather's voice, carrying a warning. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The Grand Lecture Hall at ITMO University in St. Petersburg, hummed with anticipation. Holographic displays flickered in the air, showing John's equation from multiple angles as he addressed the assembled crowd of the world's leading physicists and military officials. "The implications are clear," John said, his voice carrying through the ancient hall. "We're not just describing space-time anymore. We're learning to speak its language, to reshape its very fabric." He gestured to the elegant mathematics floating before him, each symbol pulsing with soft blue light. In the front row, Dr. Elena Petrov leaned forward, her eyes sharp and calculating. Behind her stern expression, John caught a glimpse of something else, concern, perhaps even fear. She understood more than most what his equation truly meant. The questions came rapid fire after his presentation. John handled them all with practiced ease, even as he noticed General Vasily Orlov in the back of the hall, speaking quietly into his neural comm unit. The general's cybernetic augmentations glinted in the low light, standard issue for Russian military command. Dr. Duncan, Elena stood, her voice cutting through the excited murmur of the crowd. Have you considered the implications if your equation fell into the wrong hands? The potential for weaponization? The hall fell silent. John touched the medicine pouch beneath his shirt, drawing strength from it as his grandfather had taught him. Knowledge itself is neutral, Doctor. Petrov, it's how we choose to use it that matters. My equation could give us clean energy, faster than light travel, a path to the stars themselves. Or yes, it could be weaponized. That choice belongs to all of us. Later, in his hotel room overlooking the Neva River, John stood at the window watching autonomous drones patrol the night sky. The city had changed since his last visit. More neural interface stations, more security checkpoints, more signs of a world racing toward a technological singularity it might not be ready for. His tablet chimed with an incoming message from Mira. Pentagon's going crazy over your presentation. Half the physics community is calling you the new Einstein. The other half thinks you're going to destroy the universe. Miss you, dinosaur. Come home soon. John smiled at her use of their old joke about his refusal to get neural implants. He preferred to rely on his natural abilities, a choice that made him increasingly rare in academic circles. His grandfather's teachings about maintaining connection to one's true self had always resonated more deeply than the promise of technological enhancement. The attack came without warning. The room's smart systems went dark first, plunging him into total darkness. John's body reacted before his mind could process what was happening, muscle memory from countless hours of training with his grandfather taking over. He dropped and rolled as the window exploded inward, fragments of smart glass raining down where he had stood moments before. Dark figures poured through the breach, their movement betraying military training. Their combat suits absorbed light, making them nearly invisible to the naked eye. But John didn't need to see them. He could feel their presence, sense their movement through the air as Chaska had taught him. He managed to disable two before a third caught him with some kind of neural disruptor. The world spun, his consciousness fragmenting like light through a prism. As darkness claimed him, John heard General Orlov's voice. Carefully with him. His mind is what we need. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was his tablet, still displaying Mira's message. Below it, a single line of his equation glowed in the darkness, the mathematical expression for bending space itself. He awoke to the cold. Even before opening his eyes, John knew he was no longer in St. Petersburg. The air held a different quality, thinner, sharper, with the distinct bite of Siberian winter. His grandfather had taught him to read the air this way, to let it tell its story. Ah, Dr. Duncan, welcome back to consciousness. General Orlov's voice carried the artificial warmth of someone used to interrogations. I apologize for the theatrical nature of your arrival, but we have much to discuss about your remarkable equation. John opened his eyes to find himself in a sterile white room. Through a reinforced window, he could see snow-covered forests stretching to the horizon. Somewhere in Siberia, then, far from any help. Your equation is brilliant, Orlov continued, but incomplete. You've held back crucial elements in your publication. We need the full theory. The equation published is complete, John replied, his voice rough. The rest is just engineering. Orlov's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on him. We both know that's not true. You've discovered something profound about the nature of reality itself, something that could give Russia the advantage it needs in this new technological Cold War. As Orlov spoke, John's mind was already racing, cataloging details about his surroundings. The vibration of heavy machinery far below them, the slight hesitation in the guards' movements, suggesting they were receiving orders through neural implants. The way the snowflakes fell outside, telling him wind patterns and temperature. All the things his grandfather had taught him to observe, to read like a story written in the world itself. The same instincts that had helped him unlock the mysteries of space-time would now need to help him survive. You have two choices, Doctor. Duncan, Orlov said, his artificial smile never wavering. Cooperate and help us understand every aspect of your discovery, or... He let the threat hang unspoken in the air. John met his gaze steadily, feeling the weight of the medicine pouch against his chest. He thought of his grandfather's words. Sometimes the greatest strength is in knowing when to bend like the river around the stone. Outside, the Siberian winter howled, and somewhere in the vast white expanse, destiny waited. 3 weeks of interrogation had taught John the facility's rhythms, the guard rotation patterns, the slight power fluctuation when the quantum containment field cycled, the blind spots in the neural-linked surveillance system. But most importantly, he had learned patience, just as his grandfather had taught him during those long hunting trips in his youth. The deer does not choose when to run, Chaska had said. It waits for the moment to present itself. That moment came during a midnight power transition, when the facility's quantum cores switched from primary to secondary systems. In the brief second of darkness, John was already moving. The guard's neural implants would be momentarily offline, their enhanced reactions dulled to merely human speeds. He had prepared carefully, studying the facility's layout through careful observation, and the subtle hints dropped by Elena Petrov during her visits. She had never openly helped him, but her careful positioning during their conversations had told him everything he needed to know about the building's structure. The first guard went down silently, a precise strike to the neural port at the base of his skull, a weakness in all augmented soldiers. The second barely had time to reach for his weapon before John was on him, using the close-quarters combat techniques that had been drilled into him since childhood. In the wild, there is no room for hesitation, his grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Act with certainty, or do not act at all. The facility's alarms began to scream as John raced through the corridors, his bare feet silent on the cold floor. He had timed it perfectly. The night shift was at its minimum strength, and the brutal Siberian winter outside would make them think twice about a prolonged pursuit. He found what he needed in a storage room. Basic cold weather gear, enough to give him a fighting chance against the elements. The rest he would have to acquire the way his grandfather had taught him, from the land itself. The outer door's quantum lock took precious seconds to hack, using a bypass sequence he had derived from his own equations. As it finally slid open, the bitter Siberian wind hit him like a physical blow. Behind him, he could hear the heavy boots of the security response team. John didn't hesitate. He plunged into the darkness, letting the snow swallow him whole. The first night was the hardest. The temperature dropped well below freezing, and the facility's searchlights painted the snow-covered landscape in harsh relief. Drones buzzed overhead, their thermal scanners searching for any sign of human heat signatures. But John had learned from the best. He packed himself into a snow cave, using the thermal properties of snow itself to mask his body heat. A trick learned during those long winters with Chaska. As he huddled in the darkness, he recited his grandfather's teachings like a mantra. The cold is not your enemy. It is simply another language of the earth. Learn to speak it, and it will shelter you. Dawn brought new challenges. The facility had deployed their elite Spetsnaz hunters, men and women trained in Arctic warfare and equipped with the latest tracking technology. Their neural implants would allow them to process environmental data in real time, making them formidable predators. But John had advantages they couldn't match. Where they relied on technology, he read the wind and snow directly. Where their augmented vision searched for heat signatures, he looked for the subtle signs of animal movement that would lead him to food and shelter. He moved at night when possible, navigating by the stars as his ancestors had done for countless generations. During the day, he became a ghost, using every trick Chaska had taught him to move without leaving traces. He fashioned snares from available materials, caught small game, and used every part as the old ways demanded. Weeks turned into months. Spring came, bringing new challenges and opportunities. The melting snow made tracking easier for his pursuers, but also provided him with more resources. He learned the patterns of the land, the movements of the animals, the subtle changes in weather that could mean the difference between life and death. The isolation should have broken him. Instead, it crystallized something in his mind. During the long nights in makeshift shelters, he found himself working through his equations, seeing them in a new light. The mathematical language he had discovered to describe spacetime began to mirror the natural patterns he observed in his survival. All things are connected, Chaska had told him. The path of the eagle in the sky follows the same laws as the atoms in your body. Learn to see the patterns, and you will never truly be lost. One night, sheltering in a cave while a spring storm raged outside, John had an epiphany. His equations weren't just describing space-time. They were describing the fundamental patterns of reality itself. The same principles that governed quantum fields also governed the flow of rivers, the growth of plants, the migration of animals. He began scratching calculations into the cave wall with a piece of charcoal, the mathematics flowing from him in a burst of inspiration. This was what had been missing from his original equation, the understanding that came not from pure intellect, but from direct communion with the natural world. 6 months into his escape, he encountered his first major setback. A drone sweep caught him in the open, and within hours, the hunters were closing in. He found himself trapped between a rushing river and advancing search parties, their neural interfaces giving them perfect coordination in the fading light. In that moment, John remembered one of his grandfather's most important lessons. Sometimes survival means letting go of your fears and trusting the river to carry you. He dived into the icy waters, letting the current take him. The hunters would expect him to fight against it, to try to reach the nearest shore. Instead, he surrendered to the flow, letting it carry him far beyond their search perimeter. As autumn painted the Siberian landscape in brilliant colors, John had become something more than either the scientist or the survivalist he had been. He was both and neither, a man who had learned to see the universe in its totality, from the quantum scale to the cosmic, from the mathematical to the spiritual. The pursuing forces had decreased over time, But they hadn't given up. Orlov was still out there, driven by the desire to control the power of the Duncan equation. But John had learned patience. He knew that, like all things in nature, his journey would reach its conclusion when the time was right. On a clear night, as the aurora borealis danced overhead, John looked up at the stars and smiled. In his head, the equations that could bend space itself had evolved, informed by months of living in harmony with the natural world. He knew now that he had only begun to understand the true implications of his discovery. The border with Mongolia was still weeks away, but John Duncan was no longer running. He was following the path that the universe itself had laid out for him, one step at a time. The lights of Ulaanbaatar appeared on the horizon like stars emerging at dusk. After 13 months in the wilderness, the sight of civilization was almost jarring to John. He stood on a ridge overlooking the Mongolian capital, his clothes worn and weather-beaten, his beard long and wild. The medicine pouch still hung around his neck, the one piece of his old life that had stayed with him through everything. During his final push to the Mongolian border, he had evaded 3 separate drone sweeps and a last-ditch attempt by Orlov's forces to intercept him. But the skills honed over months of survival had served him well. As his grandfather always said, "The hunter who chases 2 deer catches neither." The Russians had spread their forces too thin, trying to predict his movements with technology rather than understanding. The U.S. Embassy rose from the city center, its quantum shielding creating a subtle distortion in the air around it. Inside those walls waited safety, contact with home, and a return to his old life. Yet John hesitated. "You look troubled, my friend," came a voice behind him. John turned to find an elderly Mongolian herder approaching, leading a horse. The man's eyes held the same wisdom John had often seen in his grandfather's. "The path forward isn't always as clear as the path that led here," John replied. The old man nodded. "The eagle must return to earth to feed, but it never forgets the sky." He offered John a ride into the city, an act of kindness that brought tears to his eyes. The embassy's security systems scanned him thoroughly as he entered, their quantum sensors probing for any signs of technological tampering or coercion. The staff's eyes widened as they confirmed his identity. John Duncan, the physicist who had vanished in Russia over a year ago. Within hours, he was cleaned up, debriefed, and speaking with familiar faces through secure quantum channels. Mira's hologram appeared before him, her hand instinctively reaching out before remembering the limitation of the technology. "You crazy dinosaur," she said, her voice breaking. "We thought, when we lost contact." "I had good teachers," John replied, touching the medicine pouch. "Both scientific and spiritual." His father's call was more complex. Malcolm Duncan had aged years in the months of his son's absence, his hair now completely white. "Your equation," he said without preamble. "During your captivity, I've been working on it. There's something we missed, isn't there? Something about the fundamental nature of reality itself." John smiled. "The mathematics was only part of it, Dad. Out there, surviving in the wilderness, I learned to see the patterns that connect everything. The equations don't just describe reality, they reveal its underlying harmony." Back at MIT 2 weeks later, John stood in his old office, now cluttered with a year's worth of papers analyzing his work. The academic world had not stood still in his absence. Teams worldwide had been exploring the implications of the Duncan equation, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. but they were all missing the crucial insight he had gained in the wilds of Siberia. The equation wasn't just about manipulating space-time. It was about understanding humanity's place within it. Late that night, after the quantum processors had been shut down and the labs had emptied, John began to write. His fingers flew across the holographic interface as he poured out everything he had learned. The mathematics flowed naturally now, informed by both his scientific knowledge and the deep wisdom he had gained from his time in the wilderness. The new version of his equation was both simpler and more profound. It showed how vacuum energy could be harnessed not through brute force, but through harmony with the natural fluctuations of space-time itself. The path to faster-than-light travel wasn't about conquering physics. It was about understanding our place within it. As he worked, he felt the presence of both his teachers with him. His father's rigorous scientific training helped him structure the mathematics, while his grandfather's spiritual wisdom guided him in seeing the larger patterns. For the first time, the two sides of his heritage were in perfect balance. Mira found him there at dawn, surrounded by floating equations that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "You've done it, haven't you?" she asked, studying the elegant mathematics before her. "You've found the key to actual faster-than-light travel." John nodded, but his expression was troubled. "The question isn't whether we can do it, Mira. It's whether we're ready for what we'll find out there." Reports were already coming in about various governments and corporations racing to weaponize different aspects of his original equation. Russia, China, the United States. They all saw it as a tool for dominance rather than understanding. But John had learned something essential during his year in the wilderness. True power came not from control, but from harmony. The same principles that had helped him survive in Siberia would now guide humanity's first steps to the stars. He thought of his grandfather's words, "Every journey changes the traveler." The question is, are you ready to become what the journey needs you to be? Looking at the completed equation floating before him, John Duncan knew that his greatest journey was just beginning. The experimental deep space vessel Horizon hung in Neptune's orbit like a strange metallic arrow, its modular design unlike anything humanity had built before. The ship's distinctive profile was dominated by the massive toroidal quantum containment rings that encircled its central hull, designed to channel and stabilize exotic matter flow. The experimental craft's crystalline navigation array glinted in the distant sunlight, creating prismatic distortions through its quantum shielding. In the ship's engineered heart, a spherical chamber specifically designed to handle the intense space-time distortions of a warp field, John Duncan made final adjustments to the experimental warp core, the culmination of his revised equation. "Final diagnostics are green," Mira reported from her station, her voice tight with anticipation. She had insisted on being here for this moment, despite the risks. The containment fields are holding steady. Through the reinforced viewport, Neptune's blue disk dominated the view, a reminder of how far they'd come and how far they had yet to go. The station had been built in secret over the past year, funded by a coalition of independent scientists and researchers who shared John's vision of exploration over exploitation. "Dr. Duncan," Elena Petrov's voice came through the quantum communication. She had defected from Russia 6 months ago, bringing with her crucial insights into how Orlov planned to weaponize the original equation. "The vacuum energy readings are approaching optimal levels." John studied the holographic displays surrounding him, each one showing a different aspect of the experiment. The mathematics was elegant, beautiful in its simplicity. But more than that, it was right. He could feel it in the same way he had learned to feel the changing weather during his year in the wilderness. "Your grandfather would be proud." His father's voice crackled through the calm from Earth. Malcolm Duncan had undergone a profound change since his son's return, finally embracing the wisdom that existed beyond pure science. "He always said you would find your own path." John touched the medicine pouch that still hung around his neck. Inside, along with the eagle feather and pipestone, he had added a small piece of Siberian pine bark, a reminder of the lessons learned during his year of survival. "Beginning final power-up sequence," he announced, his fingers dancing across the control interface. "Initiating vacuum energy extraction." The warp core hummed to life, its crystalline structure pulsing with an inner light that seemed to bend reality around it. This was the crucial moment. Either his revised equation would work, creating a stable warp field, or... Warning klaxons suddenly blared through the station. "Multiple ships dropping out of stealth," Mira shouted. "Russian, Chinese, and American signatures. They must have tracked our quantum signatures." John's hands remained steady on the controls. He had known this moment might come. The world's powers had been searching for him ever since he disappeared from MIT 6 months ago, each hoping to claim his discovery for themselves. "They're demanding we shut down the experiment," Elena reported, her voice grim. "Orlov is leading the Russian contingent personally." Through the viewport, John could see the ships approaching, sleek predators swimming through the void. Even now, they were preparing to fire the weapons he had helped them create, each nation willing to risk everything to control the power of his equation. "John," Mira said softly, using his first name for the first time in years. "We're out of time." He looked at the warp core, its light now filling the engineering chamber with impossible colors. The equation that powered it was more than just mathematics. It was a key to understanding humanity's place in the cosmos. But that same equation, in the wrong hands, could tear reality itself apart. "Dad," he said into the comm, "do you remember what you told me when I first started studying physics? About how the greatest discoveries often require the greatest sacrifices?" There was a long pause before Malcolm replied, "I remember, son. I also remember what your grandfather told you about following the path that the universe itself provides." John smiled. Everything had led to this moment. His dual heritage, his year in the wilderness, the insights gained from both science and survival. He understood now why the equation had come to him and what he had to do with it. "Mira, Elena," he said calmly, "initiate emergency protocol Duncan Alpha. Get to the escape pods." "John, no." Mira started to protest, but he cut her off. "The universe is vast," he said, his fingers flying across the controls as he input the final calculations. "And humanity isn't ready for this power. Not yet. But someday..." The warp core's light had become almost blinding now, the vacuum energy readings off the scale. John could feel reality beginning to bend around him, just as his equations had predicted. "Son," his father's voice broke. "Don't." "I love you, Dad," John said. "Tell grandfather. Tell him I finally understand what he meant about the eagle in the sky." With a final keystroke, he locked out all external control of the system. The approaching ships were too late. The warp field was already forming, wrapping around the space vessel horizon, like a cocoon of distorted space-time. Through the viewport, John watched Mira and Elena's escape pod streak away toward the safety of the other modules. On his screens, he could see Orlov's ships desperately trying to lock weapons on his position, but the warp field was already affecting their targeting systems. In his final moments before activation, John Duncan thought of everything that had led him here. The mathematics that had opened the door to the impossible. The survival skills that had kept him alive in Siberia. The wisdom of two traditions, scientific and spiritual, finally working in harmony. "The journey begins," he whispered. The warp core's crystalline matrix began to pulse with increasing frequency, its modified geometry, based on Harold White's breakthrough research, reducing the massive energy requirements by orders of magnitude. The quantum vacuum energy extractors activated, drawing power from the zero-point field itself, while the Casimir effect generators created precise negative energy densities in the containment channels. Streams of stabilized exotic matter, John's solution to the negative mass problem, swirled through the carefully calibrated fields. Their negative energy signatures began warping local space-time, creating the impossible geometries predicted by his unified equation, the bridge between quantum mechanics and general relativity that had eluded physicists for generations. John watched in awe as space itself began to fold. Through the viewport, the stars stretched and distorted as the warp field intensified. The core's antimatter injection system engaged, providing the carefully calculated energy burst needed to amplify the quantum vacuum fluctuations. The modified bubble geometry took shape, requiring barely a fraction of the theoretical Jupiter mass energy that had once been thought necessary. The quantum gravity sensors showed the impossible, microscopic space-time distortions scaling up to macroscopic levels, proving his theories about vacuum energy interaction with curved space-time. Reality rippled as field strength readings exceeded anything humanity had achieved before, yet remained perfectly controlled within the parameters of his equations. With a silent flash of light that rippled through subspace, the warp bubble fully formed, its stability maintained by the continuous quantum-level manipulations his breakthrough had made possible. For a brief moment, John saw the universe as his equations described it, not just as mathematics, but as a unified dance of quantum fields and gravitational forces, proving that FTL travel wasn't just theoretical, but achievable through the precise manipulation of nature's fundamental forces. Then, the bubble collapsed inward, taking the space vessel horizon with it into a realm where Einstein's limitations held no power over the quantum reality beneath. When the light faded, nothing remained but a rapidly dissipating quantum signature and a mystery that would haunt humanity for generations. The first human-made warp drive had worked exactly as designed, representing humanity's first step beyond the light barrier through the perfect union of theoretical physics and technological innovation. Years later, long after the Neptune station had been converted into humanity's first faster-than-light research facility, a signal would be detected from deep space. It contained no words, no images, just a simple mathematical sequence, an elegant proof that built upon the Duncan equation, showing humanity the next step on its journey to the stars. And in that message, those who knew how to look would find something else. The wisdom that true power comes not from conquering the universe, but from learning to live in harmony with it. For John Duncan, the man who had bridged worlds, had become something new. Humanity's first explorer of the infinite, guided by both the precision of physics and the wisdom of his ancestors, forever walking the path between the known and the unknown. The eagle had found its sky at last.